The winter of 1942 and 1943 witnessed one of the most brutal and defining battles in the history of warfare, the Battle of Stalingrad. It was a battle that not only changed the course of World War II, but also marked a pivotal shift in the way wars would be fought. It was a battle of attrition, where the cost of victory was unimaginable, and the stakes could not have been higher. This is the story of Stalingrad, where human endurance, military strategy, and the will to survive clashed in one of the bloodiest confrontations in history. To understand the significance of Stalingrad, we must first step back and look at the ambitious strategy that led the German forces into the heart of Soviet Russia. By the summer of 1942, Nazi Germany had already experienced success after success in the early stages of World War II. The rapid conquest of France, the defeat of Poland, and the swift invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941 had propelled Hitler's Third Reich to the peak of power. But Hitler was not content with these victories. He had set his sights on the vast, resource-rich lands of the Soviet Union, with Stalingrad, now Volgograd, at the center of his aspirations. Why Stalingrad? Hitler believed that capturing this city would give Germany control over the oil-rich Caucasus region, a strategic area vital for the German war machine. The city was named after Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, and in Hitler's mind, its fall would deal a blow to Soviet morale while serving as a symbolic victory in the ongoing ideological struggle between fascism and communism. Thus, in the summer of 1942, Hitler launched Operation Blaue, a massive offensive aimed at capturing the southern Soviet Union, including Stalingrad. But the Germans were about to face a challenge far beyond what they could have imagined. Stalingrad was an industrial city located on the banks of the Volga River, a strategic position that made it a hub for transportation, industry, and military logistics. It was not only a symbol of Soviet pride, but also a city crucial to the Soviet war effort. Stalin himself ordered that no ground be surrendered, and the city's defenders were prepared for a fight to the death. On the German side, General Friedrich Paulus, commanding the 6th Army, was tasked with the conquest of Stalingrad. The Germans had vastly underestimated the resilience of the Soviet defenders, as well as the scale of the battle they were about to face. Stalingrad would not fall easily. In late August 1942, the Germans launched their attack. The Luftwaffe, Air Force, bombed the city relentlessly, turning it into a virtual inferno. Buildings were reduced to rubble, and the civilian population bore the brunt of the destruction. But the defenders held their ground. The Soviet Red Army, under the command of General Vasily Chuikov, employed a strategy of hugging the enemy, fighting close to the Germans to neutralize their air superiority and artillery. The fighting quickly descended into urban warfare, with every street, every building, every room becoming a battleground. Stalingrad turned into a maze of crumbling structures where combat was fought at close quarters, often with bayonets and hand-to-hand fighting. Soldiers from both sides fought in the ruins with little regard for the surrounding destruction. In this environment, the Germans began to realize the ferocity of Soviet resistance. As the battle dragged on through the fall and winter of 1942, the situation for the German forces grew increasingly dire. Hitler's insistence on holding Stalingrad at all costs, and his refusal to allow General Paulus to retreat led to a disastrous situation. The 6th Army, surrounded and cut off from reinforcements and supplies, found itself trapped in a shrinking pocket in the city. Meanwhile, the Soviet forces were preparing to strike back. The Red Army, with reinforcements from Siberia and the Ural Mountains, launched a massive counter-offensive, codenamed Operation Uranus. The Soviets targeted the weak points in the German lines, particularly the Romanian, Hungarian, and Italian forces that had been deployed to protect the German flanks. These forces, poorly equipped and inadequately trained, quickly collapsed under the Soviet assault. On November 19, 1942, the Soviets encircled the German Sixth Army, trapping over 5,000 men in Stalingrad. The once proud German forces were now locked in a desperate struggle for survival. Supplies dwindled, food and ammunition became scarce, and temperatures dropped to extreme lows. Many German soldiers, unprepared for the brutal Russian winter, began to succumb to the cold, hunger, and disease. Yet, despite the encirclement, Hitler refused to allow Paulus to retreat. He demanded that the Sixth Army fight to the death, believing that the withdrawal would be a sign of weakness. His obsession with victory at Stalingrad blinded him to the reality on the ground. As the days wore on, the German soldiers found themselves trapped in the nightmare. The streets of Stalingrad were littered with the bodies of both Soviet and German soldiers, and it became clear that the battle for the city was no longer about winning, it was about survival. By December 1942, the Soviet counteroffensive had gained momentum. With the German forces surrounded, the Soviet Union began to push back, inch by inch, until they broke through the German positions. The situation for the German Sixth Army became increasingly hopeless. While Paulus had requested permission from Hitler to retreat, the Führer stubbornly refused to budge. In his mind, the Germans could still win the battle if they held out long enough. But the tide was turning. By early January 1943, the Soviet forces had broken through the German lines and began encircling the remnants of the Sixth Army. General Paulus, now under intense pressure, was forced to surrender. On February 2, 1943, after months of fierce fighting, the German Sixth Army officially capitulated. It was a monumental defeat for the Nazis and a crushing blow to their hopes of dominating the Soviet Union. The Battle of Stalingrad had come at an immense cost. The German Sixth Army lost over 200,000 men, either killed, wounded, or captured. The Soviets, too, paid a heavy price, with estimates of their casualties ranging from 500,000 to 1 million. The city of Stalingrad was almost completely destroyed, and its civilian population had been decimated. But in the end, it was the Germans who had lost. The defeat at Stalingrad marked a decisive turning point in World War II. It shattered the myth of German invincibility and boosted Soviet morale. For the first time in the war, the Nazis had suffered a major defeat on the Eastern Front. The German army was now on the defensive, and the Soviet Union, bolstered by its victory at Stalingrad, began a long and relentless march westward, pushing the Germans back toward Berlin. The impact of Stalingrad was not limited to the battlefield. The defeat severely weakened the Axis powers' strategic position in Europe, leading to a shift in the overall balance of power. The Germans, unable to recover from their losses, would never again regain the initiative on the Eastern Front. On the other hand, the Soviet Union, emboldened by its victory, played a crucial role in the eventual Allied victory. For the Soviet people, Stalingrad became a symbol of national resilience and sacrifice. The battle embodied the Soviet spirit, unyielding, relentless, and resolute in the face of overwhelming odds. It was a victory that demonstrated the power of determination and the strength of unity in the face of adversity. Amidst the horrors of Stalingrad, there are countless stories of heroism, suffering, and survival. One such story is that of Vasily Chuikov, the commander of the Soviet 62nd Army, who fought tirelessly to defend the city. Despite the immense pressure, he never wavered in his commitment to hold Stalingrad. His leadership, along with that of Soviet General Georgy Zhukov, was instrumental in the Soviet victory. On the German side, there were stories of soldiers who, despite being trapped, never gave up. Many of these men were not Nazis, but ordinary soldiers who found themselves caught in a war they never truly understood. Some Germans managed to escape the city and later became POWs, while others fought to the bitter end, embodying the tragic futility of their mission. The civilian population of Stalingrad also endured unimaginable suffering. Thousands of women, children, and the elderly found themselves caught in the crossfire, living in constant fear of bombings, starvation, and disease. Yet many remained in the city, determined to rebuild what had been destroyed. Their courage and tenacity became an indelible part of the legacy of Stalingrad. The victory at Stalingrad not only dealt a devastating blow to the Nazi war machine, but also gave the Soviet Union a crucial psychological and strategic advantage. With Stalingrad as a turning point, the Red Army began its relentless advance, liberating occupied territories and pushing back the Germans on the Eastern Front. The defeat at Stalingrad marked the beginning of the end for Hitler's empire, as the once feared German army was forced to fight a defensive war on multiple fronts. The Soviets, now emboldened by their triumph, would eventually close in on Berlin, culminating in the fall of the Nazi regime and the end of the war in Europe. Stalingrad's legacy, therefore, lies not only in the physical destruction of the German Sixth Army, but also in its symbolic victory over tyranny, marking a decisive shift in the tide of history.